I am an old woman now.
My hands shake when I hold a cup of tea, my knees ache when the weather changes, and my voice is slower than it once was. But there are memories that age cannot touch.
They lie sharp and bright inside me, like broken glass buried under skin.
Tonight, I want to tell you one of those memories, because it nearly killed me, and because maybe somewhere a young girl is listening, wondering if she will survive her own silence. People love to say that family is the safest place in the world. I believed that once. I believed it because I had no choice. I was born believing it, raised hearing it, taught that loyalty mattered more than truth and obedience mattered more than pain. But family was not my shelter. Family was where my fear learned my name. I was born in 1952 in a forgotten little town called Hollis Creek, Kentucky. A place where everyone knew your business before you did. A place where men ruled with their voices and their fists, and women learned to lower their eyes and endure. I was the second child in the Hale family. My father, Walter Hale, worked long hours and drank even longer nights. My mother, Evelyn, was small, quiet, and tired in a way that sleep never fixed. And then there was my brother Evan, 5 years older than me, tall for his age, golden-haired, charming, the kind of boy adults smiled at without knowing why. From the moment Evan was born, the house revolved around him. My father used to say Evan was proof that God loved our family. I was proof of nothing. I was the girl who came later, the afterthought, the one who learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. When Evan laughed, my father laughed with him. When Evan broke something, it was forgiven. When Evan raised his voice, it was strength. When I cried, it was nuisance. I remember the first time I felt something was wrong. I couldn't have been more than 7. I was sitting on the bedroom floor, lining up my dolls, pretending they had safe homes and kind parents. Evan closed the door behind him.
I remember the sound.
A soft click. Ordinary. Nothing dramatic. But something inside me knew that sound would follow me forever. At first, I didn't have words for what happened. Children rarely do. I only knew I felt small, trapped, confused. I knew my body reacted in ways my mind didn't understand. I knew I felt dirty without knowing why. When I tried to pull away, he laughed. When I looked scared, he told me it was our secret. When I asked him to stop, he reminded me who everyone loved. I tried to tell my mother once. I stood next to her while she washed dishes, the smell of soap thick in the air, my heart pounding so loud I thought she could hear it. I told her Evan scared me. I told her he touched me in ways I didn't like. She froze. Her hands stopped moving. For a moment, I thought she would turn around, pull me into her arms, save me. Instead, she whispered that I was imagining things. She told me not to say such ugly lies. She told me my brother would never do something like that. That was the day I learned silence could be taught. As the years passed, the house grew smaller and my fear grew larger. My father praised Evan constantly. He talked about the man Evan would become. Strong. Respected. Powerful. And I learned that monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they look like sons. By the time I turned 10, I understood one thing clearly. No one was coming to help me. The people who were supposed to protect me had already chosen sides, and I wasn't on the winning one.
I learned how to endure. I learned how to leave my body without leaving the room. I learned how to breathe quietly, how to cry without sound, how to survive one night at a time.
Even now, at my age, I can still feel that little girl inside me, holding her breath, hoping the door won't open again. That girl didn't know yet how bad it would get. She didn't know her childhood would end before it ever really began. She didn't know that one lie told often enough can become the foundation of an entire life. But she knew one thing. Something was terribly wrong, and the truth was more dangerous than the pain. That was the beginning. And the beginning was already more than any child should ever have to carry. By the time I learned how to read, I had already learned something much harder. I had learned how to stay quiet. Silence became my language long before words ever could. It was the skill that kept me alive in that house, the invisible shield I carried everywhere, even when it cut into me from the inside. In Hollis Creek, children were not supposed to question adults. Girls especially were meant to listen, obey, and be grateful. Every Sunday at church, the pastor talked about family unity, about respect, about obedience to parents and older siblings. I sat on the hard wooden bench, my feet barely touching the floor, listening to sermons about love while my stomach twisted into knots. I wondered how something could sound so holy and feel so cruel at the same time. At home, the walls were thin, but the rules were thick.
My father's word was law.
My brother walked behind him like a shadow, copying the way he spoke, the way he laughed, the way he drank from a bottle when he was far too young to be doing so. Evan learned quickly that power was inherited, not earned. I learned just as quickly that weakness was punished. After my mother shut me down that first time, I never tried to tell her again. I watched her instead. I watched how she flinched when my father raised his voice. I watched how she avoided eye contact when Evan stood too close to me. I watched her pretend not to notice when I stopped wearing dresses and started layering clothes even in summer.
She knew.
I am certain of that now. She knew, but knowing didn't mean acting. Fear had already taken everything she had to give. School should have been my escape.
It wasn't. I was quiet there too.
Teachers called me well-behaved, shy, polite. They praised me for not causing trouble. No one ever asked why my grades dropped or why I started staring out windows as if I were somewhere else entirely. In those days, children like me were considered easy. We didn't demand attention. We didn't cause scenes. We carried our pain neatly. At night, I learned to measure time by sound. My father's heavy footsteps when he came home drunk. The creak of the hallway floorboard.
The pause outside my door.
My body learned fear before my mind could name it.
I slept lightly, always ready, always tense, my heart racing even in dreams.
When morning came, I got up, washed my face, and acted normal. That was another lesson. Normal is a performance, and I became very good at it. Sometimes Evan was kind in front of others. That confused me more than the cruelty. He would bring me candy from the store, pat my head, tell people I was his sweet little sister. Adults smiled. My father beamed with pride.
And I learned another dangerous truth. The world believes what it wants to believe.
A smiling boy is never questioned. A quiet girl is never believed. My body began to change before I was ready. When I got my first period, my mother handed me rags and told me to be careful now. Careful of what, I wondered. I had been careful my entire life.
Careful not to speak. Careful not to resist too much.
Careful not to anger anyone who had power over me. Careful had never saved me. As I grew older, the walls closed in tighter. Evan's presence filled every room. My father trusted him completely. If Evan said the sky was green, my father would have sworn it was. And I knew deep down that if the truth ever came out, I would be the one blamed. Girls always were. We were taught that men's mistakes were accidents and women's suffering was suspicious. There were moments when I almost broke.
Moments when I stood at the edge of confession, ready to scream the truth into the open.
But fear always pulled me back.
Fear of my father's rage. Fear of my brother's revenge.
Fear of being sent away, locked up, shamed, or worse. In a small town, reputation is a cage. Once it closes, there is no air left. So I stayed quiet. I shrank myself smaller and smaller until I barely recognized who I was anymore. I learned to leave my mind when my body couldn't escape. I learned that surviving did not mean living. It only meant continuing. Now, looking back from the distance of decades, I don't blame that girl. She did what she had to do. She used silence like armor, even when it cut her every time she moved. But I wish someone had told her that silence should never have been her responsibility. That was the burden of adults who failed her. Part 2 of my life was not marked by loud violence or dramatic moments. It was marked by endurance. By the slow erosion of trust. By the understanding that danger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers your name and waits for you to answer. And I answered by staying quiet, because in that house, silence was the only way to survive. There comes a moment in every survivor's life when hiding is no longer possible. Not because the fear is gone, but because the truth finds a way to surface through the body itself. Mine did when I was 14 years old, long before I understood what pregnancy truly meant, long before I understood that my own body could become evidence against me. By that age, I had already learned how to live divided. There was the version of me the world saw, quiet, obedient, unremarkable. And there was the version that lived inside, alert, exhausted, permanently braced for impact. I did my chores, went to school, nodded when spoken to, and kept my eyes down.
I existed in pieces.
That was the only way I knew how to survive. The first sign was the sickness. Morning nausea that made my stomach roll before my feet even touched the floor. I thought I was dying. I hoped I was. I prayed it was something that would take me quietly so I wouldn't have to explain anything. My mother noticed I wasn't eating. She scolded me for being dramatic. My father said I was trying to get attention. Evan watched me with a strange, knowing calm that made my skin crawl. Then my body began to change in ways I couldn't control. My clothes stopped fitting. My chest ached. My belly hardened in a way that felt foreign and terrifying. I wrapped myself in layers, even in the heat. I held my breath when anyone looked too long. I told myself it wasn't real. Denial was easier than understanding. When the truth finally reached my mind, it felt like falling through ice. I sat alone in the bathroom one night, counting months with shaking fingers, my reflection pale and unfamiliar. 14 years old.
A child carrying a child.
I remember pressing my hand to my stomach and feeling something move. That was when the fear turned into panic so sharp I thought my heart would stop. I didn't tell anyone at first. How could I? My mother had already chosen silence. My father would have destroyed me. Evan would have twisted the story until I became the villain. In Hollis Creek, girls didn't get pregnant by accident. They got pregnant because they were bad. That was the belief, and beliefs are harder to fight than facts. Eventually, my mother saw it.
Mothers always do.
She walked into my room while I was changing and froze when she saw my body. The look on her face wasn't shock. It was recognition. She sat down heavily on the bed and whispered my name like it was a prayer. I broke then.
I cried the way I had never cried before, loud, shaking, desperate.
I told her I didn't want this. I told her it wasn't my fault. I told her everything without saying his name. She held me and cried too. For a moment, just a moment, I thought she would save me. But fear won again. She said we had to hide it as long as possible. She said my father would kill me if he knew. She said God would punish us if the town found out. She chose survival over justice, and I understood her choice even as it crushed me. Hiding a pregnancy in a small house is impossible. My father noticed soon enough. When he did, the rage that exploded was like nothing I had ever seen. He screamed that I had shamed him. He demanded names. He accused boys who had never even spoken to me. Evan stepped forward and lied without hesitation, offering a convenient target. My father believed him instantly. He always did. An innocent boy left town in disgrace because of that lie. I stayed. I became the family's shame, locked away, pulled out only when appearances demanded it. Evan was praised for defending the family's honor. I learned that injustice doesn't just happen. It is built, brick, by people who choose comfort over truth. When the time came for the baby to be born, it happened at home. There was no doctor, no kindness, no celebration.
Only pain, fear, and my mother's trembling hands.
I remember thinking I would die. I remember wishing I would. But I didn't. He was a boy.
Small, fragile, perfect.
When they placed him on my chest, something broke open inside me that fear had never fully managed to kill. Love. Immediate and fierce. He didn't carry my shame. He carried my hope. I named him Caleb, and from that moment on, my life was no longer just mine. My father barely looked at him. Evan looked too closely. I learned to stand between them without even thinking about it. My body became a shield. My heart became a weapon. I would endure anything, but I would not let my son become what created him. At 14, I was a mother. At 14, I was still a prisoner. But something had changed. I was no longer surviving just for myself. I was surviving for a child who deserved a life untouched by the darkness that made him. That was when the waiting began.
Waiting for a chance. Waiting for a crack in the walls.
Waiting for the moment when fear would no longer be stronger than hope. And I promised myself something in those quiet nights while rocking my son to sleep. I promised that no matter how long it took, I would get us out. Even if it cost me everything. Once you become a mother, fear changes its shape. Before, fear lived inside my body. After Caleb was born, fear walked beside me, slept next to me, breathed against my chest. Every sound in that house carried a new meaning.
Every shadow felt closer.
Every mistake felt fatal. My son was no longer just my child. He was leverage. The first time I tried to leave, I was barely 15. Caleb was still small enough to curl into my arms without waking. I remember waiting for a night when the house felt unusually quiet. My father had gone out drinking. Evan was with friends. My mother was exhausted and asleep. I took it as a sign, even though I no longer believed in signs. I wrapped Caleb in a thin blanket and pressed him against my chest, rocking him until his breathing slowed. I packed nothing but a bottle, a spare cloth diaper, and the little money I had stolen coin by coin from the bottom of my father's drawer. I didn't know where we were going. I only knew we could not stay. My hand shook as I opened the door.
The night air felt unreal, like stepping into another world.
I took 3 steps down the dirt path in front of the house before I heard my father's voice behind me. Calm. Too calm. Where do you think you're going? I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would wake the baby. He hadn't gone out drinking after all. He had been watching. Waiting. That was the first time I understood that control didn't require constant violence. It required patience.
The slap came fast.
I fell to the ground, curling around Caleb instinctively, my body taking the impact. He screamed. My father grabbed my hair and dragged me back inside like I was an object he owned.
He locked the door.
Took the key. And that night, he made it very clear what would happen if I tried again. From that moment on, I was no longer just afraid.
I was trapped.
The second attempt came months later. I had learned from the first failure. I waited longer. Planned better. Or at least I thought I did. I waited until everyone was asleep. I loosened the window frame during the day so it wouldn't make noise at night. I held a kitchen knife in my shaking hand, not to fight, but to pry the wood loose. I passed Caleb through the opening first, lowering him as gently as I could. My arms burned with the effort of staying quiet. I climbed after him, scraping my side on the frame. For one breathless moment, I thought we had done it. Then a dog barked. Lights flicked on across the road.
Voices stirred.
Panic exploded through me. I ran barefoot, clutching my son, not knowing where to go, only knowing I had to keep moving. I hid behind the church, crouched in the dirt, whispering prayers I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. They found me anyway. My father came with Evan and 2 men from town. No one questioned why. No one asked why a grown man was chasing a girl with a baby through the night.
They dragged me back.
That beating nearly killed me.
I remember darkness closing in.
I remember thinking that if I died, at least it would be over. I woke up days later, bruised, swollen, barely able to move. My father leaned over me and promised that next time, he would finish the job. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The certainty in his tone terrified me more than shouting ever had. After that, I stopped trying for a while. Not because I gave up, but because I understood something crucial. Recklessness would get my son killed. Survival now required patience, not courage. Evan grew more confident after my father's death threats. He watched Caleb too closely. He talked about bloodlines, about legacy, about raising a boy right. Every word made my stomach turn. I began sleeping with my arm wrapped around my son, waking at the slightest movement.
I barely slept at all.
There were nights when I sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to Caleb for bringing him into such a world. I promised him things I didn't yet know how to deliver. Freedom. Safety.
A life untouched by fear.
Promises are easy in the dark. Keeping them takes everything. What people don't understand is that leaving abuse isn't one moment. It's dozens of almosts.
Almost leaving.
Almost dying.
Almost giving up.
Each failure teaches you something.
Where danger hides.
Who cannot be trusted.
How quiet you must be to survive one more day.
By the time my father died, I was no longer the girl who ran blindly into the night. I was watching. Waiting. Measuring every breath. I knew another chance would come, because nothing built on violence lasts forever. And when that chance arrived, I would not waste it. Part 4 of my life was not about escape. It was about learning how not to escape until escape was finally possible. There are moments in life that change everything without asking your permission. They arrive quietly, sometimes cruelly, sometimes wrapped in tragedy, and afterward nothing fits the same way again. For me, that moment came on an ordinary autumn morning, the kind that smells like damp leaves and cold air, the kind that should have meant nothing at all. My father died suddenly. I didn't cry when it happened. I didn't scream or collapse the way people expect daughters to do. When I heard my mother's voice calling my name from the other room, thin and broken, I already knew. I walked into their bedroom and saw him lying there on the floor, his face an unfamiliar color, his eyes half open, staring at nothing. For a long moment, I felt nothing at all. No grief. No relief. Just a hollow stillness, as if my body was waiting for permission to react. The town doctor said it was his heart. Too much drinking.
Too much anger.
Too many years spent feeding a body that never learned restraint. People shook their heads and said it was a shame.
A good man gone too soon. A hard worker. A family man.
I listened to them speak those lies over his body and understood something with terrifying clarity.
The truth doesn't die with the guilty.
It just gets buried with them. The house filled with people. Neighbors. Church women. Men who drank with him and laughed at his jokes. They brought casseroles and sympathy and stories about how kind he had been. I stood in the corner holding Caleb, watching the performance, realizing that the man who terrorized me had left behind a legend that protected him even in death. Evan stepped into his role immediately. He moved through the house like he owned it, because now he did. He accepted condolences with a firm handshake and a serious face. He made decisions. He spoke for the family. He stood beside the coffin like a king taking his crown. And when his eyes met mine, I saw it clearly.
The same control. The same entitlement.
Only now, there was no one above him. The reading of the will came days later.
I sat beside my mother, my heart pounding, a small, foolish hope flickering inside me.
Maybe my father had left something.
Anything. A little money. A way out.
That hope died quickly. Everything went to Evan. The house.
The land.
The savings. My mother and I were allowed to stay only as long as Evan permitted it.
I understood the message.
Nothing had truly changed. The prison had simply changed wardens.
That night, I lay awake holding my son, listening to the house settle in unfamiliar silence.
My father's footsteps were gone, but the fear hadn't left with him. It had simply shifted shape. Evan was quieter now, more confident, more dangerous. He spoke openly about the future. About how things would run. About how Caleb would grow up strong under his guidance. That was when something inside me hardened. I realized I would not get another chance. Not many, not someday, not when things calmed down. This was it. If I stayed, my son would grow up under Evan's influence. He would learn the wrong lessons. He would inherit a legacy of cruelty wrapped in pride. And I would have failed the only promise that mattered. Help came from where I least expected it. A woman from town, someone with enough power and distance to act without fear, quietly offered assistance. She did not ask questions. She did not demand explanations. She simply said she could arrange a bus ticket, a place to go, a way to disappear. There was one condition.
I could never come back.
No letters. No visits. No explanations. I agreed without hesitation. The days that followed felt unreal. I moved through the house like a ghost, preparing quietly, carefully.
I hid what little money I had. I gathered documents.
I planned routes and times. I watched Evan closely, waiting for a night when his attention would be elsewhere. Fear sharpened me.
Love made me brave. The night before I left, my mother found me standing by the door, my bag at my feet, Caleb asleep against my shoulder.
She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Tired in a way that went beyond exhaustion. She didn't ask where I was going. She didn't try to stop me. She simply nodded and whispered that I was stronger than she had ever been. I kissed her goodbye knowing I would never see her again. Before dawn, I walked out of that house for the last time. Every step felt like tearing something loose from my body. The road was cold. The sky was just beginning to lighten. My heart raced with fear and something else I barely recognized. Hope. When the bus pulled away, carrying me and my son toward a place where no one knew our names, I didn't look back. I couldn't. Some doors must be closed forever, or they will find a way to pull you back inside. That was the day my captivity ended. Not because the past disappeared, but because I chose to stop letting it decide our future. And for the first time in my life, the road ahead belonged to me. Freedom does not arrive the way people imagine. It does not feel like celebration or relief at first. It feels like disorientation. Like stepping into bright sunlight after years in the dark, your eyes burning, your balance unsure, your body still braced for blows that no longer come. When the bus carried me and Caleb away from Hollis Creek, I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Every mile between us and that town felt unreal, as if someone might still reach out and drag us back. I sat rigid in my seat, holding my son too tightly, listening to the hum of the engine, counting breaths, watching unfamiliar roads slide past the window. I didn't know who I was without fear. I only knew who I refused to be anymore. We arrived in a city that felt enormous to me.
Streets full of strangers.
Buildings stacked on top of one another like they were competing for space. No one looked at me twice. No one knew my history. That anonymity was my first gift. I took a new name, a plain one, easy to forget. I learned how to blend in.
How to keep my head down without shrinking.
How to be cautious without being silent.
Work came first. Hard work. Honest work.
Kitchens, cleaning, long hours on my feet with sore hands and aching back. I welcomed the exhaustion because it was different from fear. It was the kind that let you sleep at night. I earned just enough to keep us fed and sheltered. Each small paycheck felt like proof that I could stand on my own. Caleb grew quickly. Children do when love is consistent and violence is absent. He learned to walk without flinching at loud voices. He learned to laugh freely.
He slept through the night without crying.
I watched him closely for signs of the past I carried, terrified I would see Evan in his face, my father in his temper. But what I saw instead was kindness. Curiosity. A gentle spirit that had never known the house I escaped. I lied to him. Carefully. Lovingly. I told him his father died young. That he had been a good man. A worker. Someone worthy of respect. Some people believe truth is always owed. I don't. Children deserve safety more than truth, especially when truth carries poison. I gave my son a story he could grow inside without shame. Years passed.
I saved what I could. I learned how to trust slowly.
I built friendships with women who didn't ask too many questions and didn't push when I changed the subject. I learned that family can be chosen. That care doesn't have to come with conditions. That kindness can exist without debt. There was a man later. Not a lover in the way people expect, but an older soul who offered stability without control. He respected my boundaries. He cared for my son without claiming ownership. When he died, he left us a home, not because I asked, but because he believed we deserved permanence. That house became proof that survival can turn into belonging. Caleb grew into a good man. Educated. Gentle. Strong in the ways that matter. He built a life filled with honesty and warmth. He became a husband, then a father, and when I held my grandchildren for the first time, something inside me finally loosened. A knot I hadn't realized I still carried began to untie. They never knew. They will never know.
The past stops with me.
Now I am old.
My world is quiet.
I sit on my porch and watch the light change, listen to children's voices drift from nearby houses, and feel something I never thought I would feel in that bedroom long ago. Peace. I tell my story now not because I want pity, and not because I need forgiveness. I tell it because silence nearly killed me once, and because somewhere a woman or a girl might be listening, thinking escape is impossible, thinking endurance is the same as living. It is not. I survived because I believed, eventually, that I deserved more. I stayed alive long enough to give my son a different inheritance. Not fear. Not violence. But choice. If I had to choose again, knowing everything I know now, I would still walk onto that bus before dawn with nothing but a child in my arms and terror in my chest.
Because fear fades.
Love stays. And sometimes, surviving is the most powerful act of defiance there is.